Greetings all and welcome to Cochise Convos, a podcast dedicated to sharing your stories and information about Cochise College. This is episode 11 of Cochise Convos Quarantine Edition, where we'll be listening to your stories as students and alumni and how you've managed to adjust during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, my guest is Tamara King, who's a recent graduate from Cochise College and is pursuing a degree in social work at Northern Arizona University. Today, she's going to be sharing her experience in managing school and working in the healthcare clinic during the pandemic. Tamara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So in general, Tamara, how was the quarantine period for you? And were you quarantined with anyone or were you by yourself?
So I'm not really sure if you would call it quarantine for me, just because I still had to go to work and I was mainly at home with my mom and my sisters. I didn't really change my routine. Everything kind of stayed the same. School was still online. I was an online student for the semester, so the only thing that changed is wearing a mask all the time.
And Tamara, also a fancy little tidbit about you is that you were our Phi Theta Kappa Alpha Muta Zeta chapter's president. Whoop, whoop. So we're so excited to ask you some questions about that. And the first one we have for you is, as the president, how was your role influenced by the consequences of the pandemic?
Oh, that's a good one. So working while going to school and also having my role as president, it was very challenging. I relied on a lot of help from the other officers. I think the biggest thing is I started having to work on days that we would have meetings. I wasn't there for a lot of decision making and stuff like that, so I felt like my time as the president for the year had kind of abruptly ended as soon as everything went into effect and schools shut down, nobody can come back to campus. So I feel like after March, after spring break, everything just kind of ended and I wasn't in college anymore, except for I had to attend my classes. But it was kind of sad, but I still got to be a part of the virtual induction and everything like that. And I think I was really excited that there was still some things that I could be a part of with Phi Theta Kappa, but it really sucked not being able to see everybody after convention and everything too, because there's just so many things that went on right before.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate timing on for our chapter's schedule too, because we just finished regional convention. We were gearing up to go to Texas, and then that ended up getting canceled, and then we had to do induction online too. So it was definitely strange. And since you've done a few inductions, Tamara, as president, how did it feel doing it completely online?
So doing it online, it actually flowed almost exactly the same as it would in person, other than we can't really light candles and, people walk up and sign the little book that you normally sign when you are inducted. So there's a lot of changes when it came to the virtual aspect, but overall it kind of flowed a lot nicer than you would have thought. Even with such short notice of changing it to virtual, I was very impressed with it.
That's wonderful too, that we're able to still hold those events that were so important to Phi Theta Kappa, even despite the pandemic and its influence it's had on all of our lives. But Tamara, you mentioned in your bio how you're pursuing a degree in social work at NAU. What made you interested in that field, and how do you think this field is impacted by COVID-19?
Fun story. I was sitting in Jen's office with the former president. It was 2018-2019 school year, and I was very stuck because I wanted to do nursing. And I had realized I really didn't want to do nursing. I was just doing nursing because I thought that I had to be in the medical field because my family, and that's just kind of where I kind of put myself in high school. But sitting in Jen's office and kind of going over things of what do you want to do, why do you want to do it, and I couldn't come up with anything that seemed almost like interesting or like it was valuable to me. And Brian had mentioned social work, and I was like, I did think about that in high school. I just never like thought more on it. I had thought about how my mom was in the foster system for a little bit, which she was fortunate enough to get adopted by her grandma, so still kind of in the family. She got to go to a nice loving home, but that's like not the case for most kids in the foster system. And I had thought maybe I could change it. Maybe I could do something that does change it. And social work, you can work any field. You could do behavioral health. You could do counseling. You could be the person that goes into the home to see if these foster parents are up to code per se, like on safety wise, food wise, where's the kid sleeping, stuff like that. Or even a social worker that works in like a hospital or a nursing home, because you still need somebody to check up on your elderly or the people in the hospital that like suffer from domestic violence. I think one of the big things with social workers in the pandemic is there's a lot more domestic violence going on, especially because everybody's stuck at home. And because everybody's stuck at home, and those women or men, whoever it is that is going through all of that, they're stuck. They don't have a place to go like they usually do, like work. Work may be their place to go to just really like breathe. There's a lot of like child abuse cases coming up and everything during all of this, which is really, it's very, very sad to think about, especially because like kids can't get back into school and that's their safe place. I think the biggest part of social work in the pandemic is more people on the front lines of trying to get these kids to a safe place, or get these women out of these homes, or even men out of these homes from their wives or their partners, whether they however they live. I think that has to be the biggest thing, is getting people out of their homes when their homes aren't safe, or even getting them out of a situation, even if they're just coming to the hospital because they've tested positive and they're having complications, and getting them through feeling so stuck and so lost because they have to be set apart from everybody. The counseling aspect really helps. I feel like when people think of a social worker, they don't really think about how they can do counseling, how they can do all that type of stuff. They necessarily just think, oh, they're just taking kids out of homes, placing them in homes, stuff like that. But I don't think they really think about all the different roles that a social worker has.
Do you see an increase for the demand of social workers?
Not necessarily like an increase. I think it's just more training on trying to get people safe and people feeling safe. So I think it's more of we just need better training when it comes to everything, and especially because we have to wear masks and everything now when we're in contact with anybody. So it's also training of how do we get them out of their home if it's not safe for us to go to their home.
And with that too, for our audience members who might not be familiar with some of the benefits of a social worker, you mentioned briefly some of the roles, but if you are someone who's struggling with mental health, what can be some of the benefits of working with a social worker?
So I think one of the benefits of working with a social worker is being able to have that extra set of eyes. There are kids that are going through eating disorders. There's kids that they're having a hard time because maybe mom or dad is in the hospital because they have COVID. And it's just, there's so much going on. And it's just nice having that integrated help, someone to talk to really, because you're stuck at home with your family and you don't really want to open up with your family because you can't go anywhere once you tell them something. What if they're judging you? You live with them, Most kids don't open up to their parents because they're like, they're going to judge me. I don't want to disappoint them. That's like a lot of thoughts in a kid's head. Or even speaking with like a spouse, let's say your trust isn't very good because it's an abusive or toxic relationship. You don't really have the ability to talk to them, and just kind of having that person come in and, you know, really like calm you, even though you feel like they're going to judge you. At least it's somebody that can take that judging aspect out and really like let you understand, like, I'm here for you. I know everything that's going on. Everybody may be going through being and in quarantine, but even though we're all going through this, we all are going through it differently.
And you mentioned, Tamara, that you worked in the healthcare clinics right when the pandemic was going on. And as someone who was on our front lines, can you walk us through what a typical day was like for you at the clinic, and anything you noticed that was different than how it would have been pre-COVID?
A typical day before COVID was just constant patients coming in. And I worked in pediatrics, so it was a lot of like stuffy noses, pink eyes, hand, foot, and mouth, stuff like that. Now, if your kid is sneezing, you can't come into our office. You need to do it over the phone, it's really hard for a kid because you want to look in their ears. Do they have an ear infection? You want to look in their throat. Maybe it's strep throat, but it's also like, you said that they're sneezing and their throat hurts. What if they were exposed? So it's just, there's so many changes. A typical day after everything happened with the pandemic was, I was on my computer so much. I was more drained from stress and being at my desk all the time than drained from running around the clinic trying to get vaccines for our kid, or trying to walk them around the clinic. I have to go get their vision, I have to go get their hearing, stuff like that, or I have to take them to lab. There's a lot more precautions that came. We had to make sure they had a mask. If they needed labs and there was too many people waiting out on the bench, they had to wait in the room. And you'd also have to pay attention to their room. We don't want to have them leave if they still need other things done, because we don't want them having to come into the clinic so often. And then the schedules are super empty, especially because patients don't necessarily like the fact that they have to be seen over a video, or if they have to talk to the provider on the phone. So they're like, no, I want to be seen in person. But the thing is we have certain protocols when it comes to being seen. If they have any precautions of, even if they went out of the county or even went out of town, we had to put them in like what we necessarily call the sick side, which if they have a fever, if they have a cough, if somebody in the household was sick, they had to be put on the sick side. It just all depends. If they had a rash, when the whole rash thing came up, babies are getting rashes when they have COVID. If they had a rash and it was just simply like hand, foot, and mouth rash, we still had to put them on the sick side because we don't know what type of rash it is. And even if they had the rash, we wanted it to be over video, but it's so hard to see on a computer screen, especially when the kid's moving around. I think the biggest thing was diabetic patients, kids, adults, whatever age they were. We didn't want them to come into the office, especially because there's high risk. We don't want them to get sick because they're immunocompromised. So just checking like their sugars, checking how they're doing throughout a certain amount of time. I think that's like a huge thing, is technology has to increase and develop and everything like that, just so that we can get things done like we normally do. And there's so much that has changed in just a typical day. You don't know what's going to go on. Yesterday you could have been told, hey, you're coming in, you're working with this doctor, it's going to be in person. You come in that day and you've got to call all your patients and cancel their appointments or switch them to video because the provider can't come in because they have to go to the hospital, or they can't see patients in person because let's say they've been exposed to a patient who has it, and if they've been exposed, they have to be on quarantine. When you get to work, you have to get your temperature checked. If you don't get your temperature checked or like your symptoms checked, you're going to get dinged or in trouble because you're putting people at risk. And if you have a fever, you go home. And the thing that sucks is if you have like a sore throat and you think, oh, it's just allergies, you can't think, oh, it's just allergies. You have to be so cautious. If you have a cough, just because you have a little tickle, just because, let's say, the air is super dry, you have to stay home. You have to stay in quarantine. So it's just everything changes daily. There's no typical day anymore.
And that is really, it's tumultuous in the sense you described it, because there's no predictability. You may be told one thing and then a few hours later that could change, and to have to adapt on the fly like that must be immensely stressful. And more power to you for doing the work, because we owe it to you who provide, individuals who provide this healthcare service. So we thank you, and we're so grateful that you're able to tell us a little bit of what it's like, because for us who don't work in hospitals, don't work in the clinics, we have very limited idea, if anything, no idea what it's like, and the amount of stress and the burden that you guys have on your shoulders. So thank you for sharing that with us, because it's so important to be able to hear from someone who's been on the front lines doing the work.
And it's also a great help to us when you guys wear your masks when you come in, or when you guys are being cautious at staying home and not going unless you absolutely like need something at the store, or you need to go to the doctor. I like understand that certain things you're just so used to, like with going to the stores and stuff like that, but stock up, get canned food. I know it sucks. College students eat ramen all the time. If you guys like just stock up on all of these things and like prevent yourself from having to go out all the time, it will make everything speed up in the fact of getting things open. You know, I know you want to go out and party and stuff like that, but you really, really got to understand that as soon as you start doing that, you're getting exposed, or you're exposing somebody. And so the safer you are, the safer you're making our lives in the healthcare field, and the safer you're making your peers and your family.
And Tamara, it has been a pleasure getting the chance to speak with you today. My final question for you before we wrap up today's episode is, if someone is struggling with social distancing in their academics, what advice would you give to them?
I think the biggest thing is if you're feeling very down about how you don't get to see your friends, you don't get to do those group projects, you don't get to do stuff like that, try like Skyping, video chatting, something with one of your friends, even if they're not in one of your classes. Try to make a set day that everybody like meets over video chat. Try to wear your masks, even though you're like, oh, they're my friends. It's whatever. You don't know if your friends went out and were exposed to somebody. So you got to think about yourself, but you've also got to think about them. Just stuff like that. It'll kind of help normalize everything. If you're feeling like, I really need to get out of the house, I don't like this whole social distancing thing, take your laptop, take your books, and you could simply just go sit outside and just kind of like open yourself up to nature while still doing what you need to do. Try not to do schoolwork in your bed. Try not to do schoolwork in your room at all, actually, just because you want to make sure that you're not confining yourself, but also still keeping yourself and others safe.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Tamara, for coming on to the podcast today. It's been wonderful getting the chance to speak with you. And thank you, everyone else, if you've been watching and listening in and following along. If you like what you hear, please be sure to give us a thumbs up and press the subscribe button on to Cochise College's YouTube channel. And make sure you click the little bell icon to enable post notifications so you get a notification every time we post new episodes. Thank you again, Tamara, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.